Okay, can everyone hear us? Just to make sure, give us a thumbs up. Brilliant, fantastic. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Ben. This is Laura. Excuse the glare in the middle, but we are very COVID compliant. There is a perfect screen between us to make sure that we don't breathe on each other or anything. We're going to keep it relatively informal and try and maximise the opportunity for the Q&A at the end, really. We'll talk for about half of the time, really through some of the kind of anecdotal evidence we picked up and case studies, etc., and then really open it up to you guys and hopefully answer any questions you've got. So I'm going to kick off with a bit of a market update. Then Laura's going to talk about how recruitment specifically has changed in recent months. We're also going to look at what hasn't changed, because some things do stay the same. Hopefully pick up on some case studies, or we'll pick up on some case studies about where we've really seen it work very well with some of our clients. And then also finish off with actually looking at maybe where it doesn't quite work as well, and some of the pitfalls and red flags to just be aware of when you're recruiting during these strange times. So just kicking off with a bit of a market update. End of March, recruitment fell off a cliff, pretty much. We saw the majority of temp starts, most perm processes all put on hold as people got accustomed to working from home. The report on jobs that the Recruitment and Employment Confederation produces, specific to the Midlands actually, saw the biggest drop in perm placements and temp billings in the history of the report, which is kind of 25 years old. The same for job vacancies, and it actually saw the first increase in staff availability for 7 years. Obviously, candidate market's been very tight in recent years, but that kind of shows you what we're kind of up against. But since then, we have seen a kind of gradual improvement, almost week on week. Temp business driven by those businesses that have been providing, I should say, essential services during the lockdown, and maybe online orders as well, as people have been ordering from home. Perm-wise, permanent-wise, after the initial shock, many businesses realised they still need to recruit important people, particularly in the tech sector. And they moved swiftly to moving into the virtual recruitment processes that we're going to talk about today. And that trend has really gradually continued. And to give you an example of the demand increase we've seen, we started off by furloughing pretty much every single consultant, and as of next week, everybody bar one's actually going to be back working, because we need the hands on deck to deliver. In terms of the long-term picture, that I suppose is where it becomes a little bit more unclear. We're not sure whether this is just pent-up demand, as with a lot of businesses actually, that might fall away moving forwards. We'll see the real impact on the jobs market and kind of the unemployment sector when the furlough unwinds over the coming months. And we do see kind of redundancies probably coming in the coming months. So we've started to see, as much as we've seen demand for recruitment services, we've started to see an increase in inquiries for the redundancy and outplacement support work that we do as well. So overall, a pretty positive picture actually, probably more positive than maybe we thought, where we thought we were going to be at this time when we go back to the start of lockdown. But I think we know that there are challenges ahead in every sector, and not least in recruitment and the labour market. And it'll be really interesting to see what Rishi Sunak talks about today and over the coming weeks in terms of what additional government support they're going to put in place to try and shore up the jobs market. So that's just a little bit of an overview as to where we're at. I'm just going to hand over to Laura now to talk about some more specific changes within recruitment. Okay, so hi guys. So it's been a really interesting few months for me and Ben, kind of stressful at times as well. As we've kind of been thrown into, normally Ben and I tend to just do the exec level recruitment hands-on, but actually we've been doing everything from an industrial cleaner to an administrator to a software developer and everything in between. So we really feel like we're lucky in a way that we've had exposure to all different areas of the market. We've really seen kind of the benefits and pitfalls of how that process is working. What are the key changes that have happened in the recruitment market then since March? There's probably three that stand out. Flexible working and remote working has happened, increasing video use, and of course an increased number of applicants on the market and number of candidates that are available. So I'll just touch on all three of those quickly now. So firstly, flexible working. If you know us and you've seen us present at all in the last couple of years, you'll know that flexible working has kind of been top of our agenda for some time, trying to encourage companies to embrace
flexible working practices, and remote working and things like that, and flexible working times. And we've kind of gone from one extreme to another really suddenly, with everyone suddenly having to work from home. And I suppose that flexible word would suggest there's some kind of I don't know, some kind of choice in the matter, whereas we've really just had it thrust upon us. But I think most businesses have kind of said, they've really invested into it, they've had to, and so they're not going to just go back to where they were. There's going to be kind of an in-between that companies are going to adopt once the pandemic subsides. So we're still learning, it's still all new, but we feel like we've kind of started developing some best practices, and that's what we want to share with you today. The second point was about video interviewing and video, what kind of whole remote processes. So video isn't anything new. We've had the technology for years, and it's something that's been talked about for a long time. But it was something that actually candidates have been quite, and just people generally have been quite resistant to. Why speak on video when you can speak face to face? Let's come and have a meeting, or let's just speak on the phone. But now we're finding that everyone's embracing it, and that's great. And I don't think that will go away, even when we're allowed to kind of meet face to face. And there's lots of benefits of that that we can kind of talk about. I myself, I find when I'm booking in a telephone call with anybody, whether it's a friend or a candidate, I much prefer to book in a video call now. It's just so much more engaging. So that, and we'll touch again on the benefits and the pitfalls of that as we go through this presentation. And then the other element that we've seen is a massive increase on the number of candidates in the market. We've gone from a very, very skilled short market where it's been difficult to find even the most basic roles, to a market where, we'll put I'll put an advert out actually on Friday for an administrator, a part-time administrator role, and I had to take the advert down on Monday because I'd had 135 applications over the weekend, which are just not the kind of numbers that we were looking at before. And I think there's a real mix of people. So you've got people who are genuinely interested in the role and they're interested in the opportunity. But sometimes you've got a few less of those genuine ones where they would have moved anyway because people are staying where they are just because of the uncertainty in the market. Then you've got people who have been made redundant, lost their jobs, or are at risk of that. So you've got some people with quite a high level of desperation, I suppose. They're worried about their own financial security, and so they might just go for any job. And so you might end up with people who aren't as committed and might continue looking for their ideal role once they've secured a job, something to bring money in. And then you've got the new aspect of people who are on furlough, and those people have got so much uncertainty. They're worried, they don't know what the future holds, and they're kind of wanting to line up a backup option in case the worst thing happens. So there's a real range of people, and what we've learned over this time, and we'll talk about more, is kind of really more in-depth questioning to find out what people's drivers really are. So I think those are the key three things that have changed in the market, and we'll talk about more. But what's really important to not forget is what hasn't changed. And so Ben's going to go on to that now. Yeah, so just picking up on the candidate piece actually to start off with. So absolutely there's more candidates on the market, but there's kind of a rule in recruitment to a certain extent that good people are in jobs normally. The really good people that you're trying to attract are normally working, engaged with their current employer, and that hasn't necessarily changed. If anything, candidates who are safe where they are may feel that they're going to sit this out basically and stay put while the economic uncertainty kind of unfolds over the coming 6 to 12 months. So the point here is that whilst you're going to get an increase in ad response, definitely, you still need to make sure that you're covering the entire market and using all the other different avenues that you've got available to you to attract candidates. And that kind of ties in then to the next point that definitely hasn't changed, which is around employer brand and the fact that candidate care
is vital. And actually, to a certain extent, can become difficult when you're getting a huge number of applications for every opportunity. But it's perhaps even so more important because you may well remember us talking previously, some of you, about a report that the REC produced called The Candidate Strikes Back, which was a survey of candidate experience in the UK. And I can see Tristan smiling. Yes, they are Star Wars fans. What that basically talked about was the fact that candidate experience is key in terms of helping to develop and then spread your employer brand in the market. And when you're looking at these remote recruitment processes, actually a really effective communication structure is vital to get that employer brand across. If you're not careful, it will go missing, particularly if you're relying purely on remote recruitment processes, which some of our clients are. And the other thing is as well to not think too short term. And I know a lot of the last 3 months has been about reacting almost in a knee-jerk way because things have just changed so dramatically in such a short space of time. But we need to think that kind of long-term picture with regards to how we generate our employer brand. Because whilst we may see a flurry of applicants in the next 3 to 6 months, trust me, having worked through the 08-09 credit crunch and recruited through that, there will come a time pretty quickly when the market then contracts again and candidates are hard to come by. And candidates have long memories and they will tell their friends, they will tell their families about their experiences of the recruitment process that they go through. So it's really, really important that you kind of have that employer brand in your head. And unfortunately, you know, I've known in the past, I've seen businesses, they think, oh, there's loads of candidates on the market. I haven't really got to try very hard now because they'll come to me. That isn't going to work, and the really good ones will still make the decision to go somewhere else. In terms of what hasn't changed, again, don't scrap your recruitment process, adapt it. So, you know, this isn't necessarily about wholesale changes to what you're trying to achieve, of course. It's just about adapting it, updating it to make it fit for purpose. So you still need the same proper checks and balances, whatever it is that works for you as a business, you still need to make sure that you're doing that. And that may include my final point. We're going to talk a lot about video and remote and all this kind of stuff. Some processes do still need a face-to-face interview, particularly if the job is going to involve being on site. And a really good example I've had of that recently, I just had a gentleman start. We just placed him as an operations manager for a manufacturing facility. He started on July the 1st. The recruitment process actually started way back in April because we went through the first few stages remotely, but then it got to the point where the only way a decision could be made is that that person needed to go on site, see the factory they were going to be looking after, and they also needed to see him in that environment. But what it showed was that you can come up with a really great blend of using the remote and the face-to-face interviews. So they did a telephone interview to start off with, just to start the rapport and see how they got on with people. They then used an online behavioural assessment to see what his kind of psychometric profile was like and did it fit in line with their normal expectations for this type of role. Then they did a video interview where they made sure it wasn't just one person. They actually had 3 members of the senior management team that this person was going to be dealing with and interacting with on that call. And yes, it was about assessing him, but they really did a lot of work in terms of describing the culture of the business and making sure they got that across. And then finally, at that point, they were like, right, now we need to look at getting somebody on site. And that's, you know, something that's worked really, really well. So don't skip a process just for the sake of it. You still might need to do that. I think, Laura, you've got another good point on that in terms of the face-to-face thing as well.
Yeah, so this one's just specific to industrial temps, just because we're trying to, on this webinar, cover all the different areas that we've been seeing. So I know it's not relevant to everybody, but on industrial temps, it was a particularly interesting one where we've kind of converted a lot of our processes to video interviewing. And we were also doing the same with industrial temps, but actually what we were finding is because often industrial temps are completely unskilled, they often don't have a CV, you know, so it's not something that you're talking to. It's difficult to have an in-depth conversation on a video about their skills and experience. It's more a case of kind of that intuition. It's more of an art of being able to read body language, ask the right questions, and get kind of a sense of how reliable somebody's going to be, which you can do. So we've actually really had to kind of work on that. That's probably the one that we worked on the most in terms of improving that process and improving the questioning style, Initially, we only had our most senior industrial consultants doing the video interviews for industrial, and then they still have to come in face to face, or we have to go and meet them on site to do our final tests and inductions with them. So that was a key one. We'd had a couple of surprises in the early days where we kind of interviewed people, had a good conversation, thought they were going to be great, and then as soon as they walk on site, there's something body language wise that just doesn't fit, and you kind of suddenly think, oh no, this isn't going to work. And but yeah, so that was probably the one that we've learned from the most. I just thought it was worth mentioning. But if anyone does specifically do industrial recruitment and wanted to have more of a conversation about that, then we can pick that up offline, because I know it's not relevant to everyone. So we're moving on now, aren't we, from that to the benefits and kind of the improvements that we've seen and where it really has worked, this new normal. So one key benefit, which is something that we've been banging on about for ages in terms of the flexible working side of things, is the impact on diversity and inclusion. Obviously, if you are recruiting for someone completely remotely, it can open up access to people with physical disabilities. It could also open up opportunities for women, which sometimes where women struggle to progress in careers because of kind of childcare or needing flexible working hours. So that's got to be something that hopefully is here to stay. Also, we've seen the pace of recruitment speed up. So simple things like normally, when we're doing interviews, we'll telephone screen somebody first, then we'll probably invite them to come on site and have a meeting with us. Whereas what we've actually been doing is having that telephone call and then instantly saying, right, can I flip this call into a video meeting with you right now? Can we go on to FaceTime right now? And then you're going straight into that. It's cutting out, a couple of days at that stage, and then equally on the client side as well, which is great. So a case study that would be worth sharing with you, because I can actually name the company as well, because it's all been in the public domain. We've been working really well on a project for platform housing. They came to us, I think it was end of June, wanting 14 customer service people to all start within June and July. So we're just coming to the end of that project now, and I think it's worth kind of talking through that step by step, because I think it's worked really well, and so it's kind of, I guess, their best practice. So the first thing that happened there was they came to us with the brief, and together we devised what the process was going to be. We always advise kind of agreeing the recruitment process, timescales and everything up front anyway. But particularly in this case, because it all needed to be so quick and because it was all going to be a bit out of the ordinary, we wanted to make sure that was all in place. And we have stuck to that process by and large the whole way through. So what's that process involved? So initially we put an advert out. We did branded adverts to help with Platform Housing's employer brand, because actually they weren't particularly well known in the area, as they have changed names from Fortis and previously Worcestershire Community Housing. And so it was great for their brand to be able to promote that. We actually had over 400 applications for those roles. So our initial kind of CV shortlisting was telephone interviews with us and video interviews with our consultants here. We sped up that process, as I say, by flipping telephone interviews straight into video interviews. What Platform Housing did really well when they received the CVs, the first stage of shortlisting was to do a real life call. So somebody from Platform would call up the candidate, pretending to be a customer, and they would be given some limited information to kind of deal with that call and handle the call. So it was literally 10 minutes, but very quickly they could see who was going to hit the ground running and who wasn't. And I think that was really useful, because given the pace we needed to recruit for people for, and also the fact it was going to be completely remote, where normally they might accept people with some kind of customer service experience, whether that might be from retail or some other kind of role. Here, because they were going to be working from home, there wouldn't be the real opportunity to train people from absolute scratch. They needed to really have come from a similar kind of call centre environment, doing telephone-based customer service, so they know what they're doing, and really the training was going to be on what Platform Housing do and what their processes are and how they do their job within that environment. So that was great, and that took a few discussions in the early days to change who they would normally recruit for, because normally they'd be more open than that. But we thought that was important. Then from the role plays, those telephone role plays, it went on to a video interview with a couple of line managers on Teams. That was great. That was using competency-based questions and values-based questions. And I think the values-based questions are really interesting. So kind of taking their organisational values and then asking the candidates about their own personal values and how that might fit. And I think that, as we were talking about earlier, that cultural fit, I think that helps kind of get to the bottom of some of that when you're not being able to meet people in person. And then from there, offers were made and people were starting in jobs within a couple of days. And again, that's not a usual thing, is it? Normally you've got kind of, a few weeks or something until someone starts. And so people were aware of that right at the beginning of the process, when we laid out the process with every single candidate. They knew what to expect, they knew what the timelines were, so they were all ready to start immediately. And feedback from the candidates has been that the process has been really slick. They knew where they stood the whole way through. Everybody has had good feedback, whether they were successful or not, and everyone's really excited to start. The only time they're actually going on to site is to pick up the laptop and all the equipment. Everything's being done completely remotely, and I think that's where, for 100% remote roles, I think that works really well. Yeah. So where are we now? We're moving on to, so another benefit, I think, just to mention as well, is the location thing. That's just before we finish on the benefits and where it works well, is the fact that suddenly the world's your oyster. You don't need to look at people who just live within 20 miles of where your office is, albeit sometimes there are benefits of that. But I think, Ben, you've got an example.
Yeah, so there's a couple of businesses that we've been working with in the software world. One of whom were already set up to offer remote working, but hadn't necessarily done the remote recruitment piece yet. And the way they managed it, which I'll touch on in a second, actually, in terms of some of the pitfalls and things to be aware of, but was just a really well-structured process, as Laura's just kind of emphasised with the platform case study. And with roles like that, with software development, where you can ask specific technical questions or put people through specific technical assessments, take those opportunities would be my recommendation when you're doing something remotely. But the other one that was really interesting was a Worcester-based software house who have always been a classic 9 to 5, everyone's in the office together, that's how we do it. Yes, there's a little bit of flexibility around when you might start and finish, but by and large, everyone's in the office together. But this time around, when it came to recruiting for somebody during lockdown for a software engineer, they'd actually taken the time to reassess their requirements, thought to themselves, actually, are we really going to be going back to the office full time? Probably not, certainly not anytime soon. And so specifically said, look, we're happy to kind of look outside of our normal 20, 25 mile radius remit here. And what that did was just open up a completely different pool of candidates that they have never normally tapped into. They operate in quite a niche marketplace. They are technically demanding in terms of what they expect from people. So recruiting for them, they don't normally have a huge number of people in the local area that are kind of there and on the market and interested. But actually with that role, I was able to get over half a dozen CVs to them within about 2 days, because I wasn't just restricted to looking to kind of 20, 25 miles of Worcester. And I think for a lot of businesses, and this really goes back into that flexibility piece that we were looking at, some of the recommendations that came out of that flexibility, flexible working index that was released a couple of years ago. It was, before you next recruit, look at the job and see, actually, could this be done remotely? In which case, where are we looking to recruit from? And don't just kind of dust off the same job spec and expect that they're going to have to be in the office 9 to 5 like they used to be, because we're in a new normal now, as we say. And just kind of picking up on that recommendation, and I suppose summarising in part some of the things we've already talked about, but just flagging up some of the kind of pitfalls and red flags that we've seen in our own experience, and a few recommendations attached to them. I'll return to the candidate piece first and foremost, and that candidate commitment piece. people on furlough are a completely unique set of candidates that we have not seen in the UK before. I completely empathise with them. I can understand why they're looking for other opportunities because they do not know what is going on with their current employment. But naturally, it does lead to potentially to a lack of commitment, because just as quickly as they are interested in an opportunity, they might find out actually they're safe where they are and they're going back into work, particularly given this kind of V-shaped recovery we've seen in June so far, at least, and a lot of businesses pulling people back in off furlough. So really would emphasise the importance of clarifying people's drivers for moving at the moment, more so than ever. It's always been a real priority. But to be honest, I said this to Laura earlier on, I almost felt like a little bit of a rookie a couple of months ago going into this, because I was learning so many new things when we were talking to candidates, to absolutely emphasise the importance of that. Second bit, just picking up on the structure piece, be wary of the formal interview. If you are using video, then still treat it as a formal interview. I think to a certain extent in the past, video was seen as a bit of an upgrade to an informal telephone chat. But actually, if we're going to replace the face-to-face meeting with this, we need to make sure that it's got good structure, it goes into the right amount of depth, because ultimately, you need to get out of it what you want to get out of it and answer all your questions about this candidate. The candidate, as we've already said, needs to get out of it what they need to get out of it. This is your first chance to engage with them, and that goes also through to things like company culture and employer brand. And to try and give them a feel for the company. And if you are going to go completely remote, and quite often when we're talking to candidates about roles, they'll talk about the feeling they got when they went into the office for the first time. And I'm sure people here know when they've had interviews in the past, you get a vibe, don't you? You get a feeling for an office. And if you're going to go completely remote, somehow you need to think about how you're going to get your culture, your brand, your vibe, whatever you want to call it, over through a video. On that note though, as I've already said, if it does need a face-to-face, don't skip it. Make sure that you get people in if it's absolutely necessary. But interestingly, I've had this recently, make sure you do it in a COVID secure, compliant way. Candidates are very aware of what, and potentially they're shielding loved ones at homes, whatever. I really think that any employers who are gung-ho about getting people in on site will be turning people off very, very quickly. So do be aware of that. Invest in some nice perspex screens like we have. Check the tech works. Again, experiences we've had, people not used to video platforms they've been asked to use, find out what a candidate can use. Realistically, WhatsApp, Team, Facebook, Messenger, Zoom, the lot, they all work. They're all the same thing. If you have got a specific kind of system or proprietary thing that you use in-house, or one of the big platforms like Blue Jeans, etc., just make sure that it works. Try and do a test run. It's really off-putting for both the interviewer and the interviewee if there's tech problems at the start, and it can kind of get things off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I've had a few stressed out candidates.
Yeah. I've been stressed out by it. Yeah. And then the final one, which is a really interesting one, having banged on about remote working and the benefits of it for the last half an hour, is just actually make sure it's realistic. And I go back to checking if the role is realistically can be done can be done remotely, and that's one thing. But actually check on the individual, because a lot of people have been thrust into remote working in the last couple of months because they didn't have a choice. But flexible working by its very nature is about choice, and there will be some people who will not necessarily be able to deliver the way that you want them to in a remote environment. So that goes obviously for your current employees, but also for people that you're looking to bring on. Because what you don't want is thinking that you found that person, and then 2 months in they say, look, remote working is not for me, I need to be in an office. So really need to check on that in terms of their kind of, I suppose, the psychology behind it, in terms of them being happy working from home. And then actually more practically, have you got all the kit you need to give them? And what's their broadband like? Because Herefordshire and Worcestershire is known for black spots, believe it or not. And you need to make sure there's no point setting somebody up on something if they're not actually going to be able to connect on a regular basis. And then, I'm going to hand back to Laura now, because I know she's got just one final kind of little anecdotal piece of evidence which covers off quite a few of the areas I've just talked about in terms of the kind of red flags.
Okay.
Yeah,
so this is one that I'm living through at the moment. This is a real life case that I'm still trying to get over the line. So this is a role, it's a technical manager role, so it's a relatively senior role for a software company. The role is actually going to be on site. It's not going to be a remote role, but at the moment everyone is working from home and the site is completely closed, so they can't do interviews on site. It's also it's the kind of role where you're working in a team, you're managing people, you're liaising across, you're working in scrums, all of that sort of stuff. And so that cultural thing is quite important. So the process that we went through with that is obviously I did the first stage interview, then the client did a telephone interview as first stage, half an hour, they normally do that actually, that client is their first kind of screening thing. Then they did a video interview, which they allocated an hour for. So they did the interview kind of questioning the candidates, and I think that might have been the downfall looking back. I think maybe, because normally I think when you invite someone onto site for an interview, you probably wouldn't just put in exactly an hour for that. You'd probably put in an hour, but you'd expect that maybe it was going to be longer. And if you got into a really good conversation or there's more questions, then you'd be able to have time for that. So I think potentially they hadn't gone into enough detail on like selling the opportunity and talking about what the job involves and what the company's like. I think maybe some of that was missed. So, but anyway, the interview went well, and then they were really keen on the candidate. So they thought, which was a nice touch, they would do like a meet the team kind of session. So on Teams, several of this person's peers were going to be on the meeting to kind of have a chat, meet who they'd be working with. And that was nice. It's slightly awkward, I think, because of the nature of being on video, but it was nice and I think it kind of went well. And sure enough, turned into an offer for the candidate. So I kind of duly delivered the offer with my normal level of excitement, and it wasn't met with the same level of excitement back. And I think what she was missing is that glint in the eye, that kind of, yes, I can really see myself working there, I've walked in the door. It's that feel that you were talking about. And so since then, it wasn't a no, though. Nothing had put her off at all. It wasn't a no, it was I haven't got enough information to make a decision. She's in another job somewhere else anyway. And it's a big decision for anyone to move from a role that they're already in that they know to a completely new job anyway, in normal terms. But now with so much uncertainty in the market, not being able to get on site to see what the office is like, not being able to meet any colleagues in real life, that's kind of thrown a few more questions up. So since then, there's been another hour-long meeting just with the HR manager to talk through kind of more cultural things. What she had as well that was really nice was a video, a really informal video of the inside of the office when people were there. I don't know, I think they've done it maybe for some international recruitment that they've done before, so kind of just to walk around the office. So that's really useful, and that went down well. And then on Friday, we're still going to have another meeting with the line manager to talk through, to do the bit that they missed in that initial video interview, talking through the specifics of the job, how the teams work together, and all of that stuff. So I'm still hoping to get it over the line, but it will have been 5 meetings on video as opposed to just probably a couple face to face. So, I've really learned a lot from that, and, I kept questioning myself about managing the process, but I think it's things like telling the client to explain the role and sell the opportunity is something that, because we've worked with this client for a long time, they know that, we know that they know that, but in this new video environment, things suddenly go out the window and it suddenly becomes more of a transactional call somehow. So it's just remembering to keep all of those elements in. Yeah. Okay, so that's that really. I think hopefully that's been useful. We're all finding our feet in so many ways, and I know recruitment is just one of a million different things we're all trying to familiarise ourselves with and work out how to do. So hopefully you can learn from some of our successes and mistakes that we've had along the way, and you won't make the same mistakes. Yeah, definitely more successes. But sometimes it's more useful to share the dodgy ones. So yeah, I'd like to just open it up to any questions, and also if anyone has any questions further down the line.
Yeah.
If you're not recruiting now, and you just, in 2 months' time, we'll be even more knowledgeable. Imagine. So just give us a shout then.
Perfect. Well, thank you both very much, and for sharing your experiences as well. That's been very useful. Hope everyone's found that useful as well. Just for a couple that have joined a little last minute, to ask a question, you just need to click on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and type it up in there. So I'd encourage you to ask away now. In the meantime, we have got a couple in the chat box already, so I'm going to reel them out, and Ben and Laura, if you could answer them. So the first question is, what are your thoughts on flexible working now? We feel that there may be a new normal and vast amounts of people will work from home.
So I think that we're not quite there yet in terms of where we're going to end up. I think we've talked about flexible working a lot in the last couple of years, and actually probably been, because we're big advocates of it, probably quite frustrated, as a lot of people have, with how slow actually in reality businesses have been to adapt what you call genuinely flexible approaches to working and to recruitment for people. But then with the lockdown, we kind of swung from over here where we were right away over to here. Entire businesses in the course of kind of a weekend were having to shut up shop and set up with everybody at home. And I don't think that's where we'll end up either. I think where we'll end up is somewhere in the middle, where certain people will want to work in the office. There's been a lot of talk about the kind of mental health issues that have kind of arisen during lockdown of people who were isolated. And for some people, it won't just be that they prefer to be in the office, it's actually to do their job properly, they will want to be and need to be in there. But equally, for some people, and I think this is where the evidence will start to come out in the next few months, they've been incredibly productive, they've managed their time better, and businesses have got more out of them. And maybe some of the management team who were a little bit wary about letting people work from home have had their minds changed as well. And so there will be some people that will go, yeah, you're going to work from home all the time. I myself, for example, I used to hate working from home, but actually, having done it for 3 months, kind of got into quite a good rhythm by the end of it. So I'm now kind of doing a couple of days in the office and kind of a couple of days at home. And
still hate it.
And it really works well. So I think the short answer is, I think we'll end up in the middle, and it will be a combination of the business needs, but also the individual needs. And we shouldn't lose sight of the individual needs in this, because for different people, it will be better or worse to work from home and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think another thing as well is, for young people, there's been a lot of talk about young people being the ones that are kind of more at risk during this whole thing with being laid off, made redundant. And also, as I mentioned, that case with platform housing, where maybe we would have considered people with a lot less experience before. With remote working, you kind of need more experienced people. So I think because of having that constant support for people that are completely new into a role, or if they're trying to change into a new industry or something like that, I think sometimes being on site and having people around is really helpful for that support.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Next, we have another question, and that is, are you changing your search space to make it wider in response to the remote working changes?
Short answer, yeah.
It depends on the client, really. So yeah, if a company is sure that they can 100% permanently do remote work for that role, then yes. But for example, for the platform housing case study that I talked through, while the roles are completely remote, and most of them are sort of 6-12 month contracts, there is a potential for a permanent job at the end of it for some of the individuals, and they will need to go on site. And go and work on site probably in 12 months' time. So I wouldn't want to. They were all local, so they could all travel into Worcester. So I think it just depends. Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that just to go back, to an old adage in recruitment, one of the most important things we have to do when we're dealing with clients, be they new or old, is making sure we understand the requirements of the job properly, and that includes, as Laura's already said, do they want it to work remotely? And as I've already mentioned, how feasible is it to be remote? And assuming those questions are all asked and answered, then absolutely, we're kind of looking. I've done a Zoom interview with a guy in Canada during this time. Didn't get the job. He did get an interview actually, because he just didn't need to be over here. So that worked quite well. But equally, for other positions, as Laura said, there's opportunities where they might need to be on site certain days of the week. So it really is dependent on the role themselves, as it kind of always has been to a certain extent.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Next question. What would you suggest is the most effective platform for first conversations / interviews, i.e. Zooms or Teams?
We knew it was a question. The honest answer is, I'm going to sound like such a cop-out now, but the honest answer is it's whatever works for you as the interviewer, but also for the interviewee. As I've already mentioned, there's nothing worse than trying to use some fancy bit of kit that the other person can't actually get onto at the end of it. And, you could potentially completely destroy the recruitment process before it's even started. So if I look at how we manage it with our candidates when we're first talking to them about roles, we just ask them the question. So what have you got access to? What can you use? Most will say Zoom, WhatsApp or FaceTime. Some of them have got Teams because they've got it through work accounts or individual accounts. But it really is, I don't believe there's a one size fits all for that. I think it is about what works for that particular process. And I've definitely used all different types for the same job because it's depended what the candidates needed.
I think, from my perspective, that for one-to-one calls, it's best to use the technology that the candidate is using comfortably, which, as Ben said. But then if you're trying to do an interview with multiple people on the same screen, I think Zoom is the easiest because most people are using that socially and things at home anyway. And if they haven't got like Teams or whatever technology you've got, they get emailed a link and then sometimes it doesn't work properly and you end up with stressed people ringing and saying, I can't get on, whereas Zoom is just really straightforward.
Potential red flag on Zoom, make sure you've got a paid for account so that you can go past 40 minutes. Because I have had a client set that up who didn't know that rule and 40 minutes got cut off of the candidate and we had to rearrange. So, that's completely my fault because I'd made the assumption that the client knew that, but actually not everybody knows. We're all trying to deal with things for the first time. So make sure you've got a paid for account so you can actually speak to the candidate for as long as possible.
Okay, perfect. Next question is, have you found companies being more open to working remotely longer term, or do you think they will soon revert back as restrictions ease?
I think most of them they've had to invest into the home working thing, so they've put money up, they've had to buy people computers and adaptions, and in some cases pay to upgrade people's internet and things like that. I don't think they'd go completely back. I think that flexibility will be here to stay. We're hearing from most of our larger clients that where they've got formal policies in place, they're reviewing those policies for flexible working going forward. I
think that whenever you're looking at culture or policy changing in a business, it doesn't matter how big it is, realistically it only becomes the truth of what's happening when you get buy-in from the management, from the leadership team. And I think what this has proven to a lot of leadership teams who maybe previously had been, reticent about, using remote working, because choice was taken out of their hands. And I think a few have been pleasantly surprised and thought, oh, actually, this has been all right. And I had a really interesting conversation with a massive engineering company who said that they'd actually seen an increase in productivity from their design engineers, and they were convinced it was going to be the other way. But actually, these guys working from home, after they got through a couple of little tech hiccups to make sure that they had the right bandwidth to kind of exchange all their drawings and stuff, they'd seen a massive increase in productivity because they were just safe. They were kind of in their own space, comfortable working away. So I think the big change has come from the fact that leadership in business would have seen that it doesn't mean that work stops. They can trust their employees. You could argue they probably should have done that anyway, but hey, but they are going to get what they need from their employees. They don't all need to be. Presenteeism hopefully is on the way out.
Okay, great. Next question then. So apologies I joined the session late, but did you mention anything about disability? I have an ongoing case regarding autism.
Yeah, so, well, we touched on it from the inclusion and diversity piece with regards to flexible working. So one of the big benefits of flexible working, and that we were hoping will become one of the positives that comes out from this, is that businesses that embrace remote working will actually open up their the talent pool, so to speak, available to them. Now, part of that's geographical, as we've already talked about, but definitely part of that is people who have disabilities or kind of working hours issues. I think talking about something specific to autism without knowing the exact situation, we've actually had a circumstance of that with one of our clients last year, and that's just about making sure that we have very open conversations. We had a candidate, I won't be training conversation, we had a candidate who had a support worker, but as soon as we were made aware of that, we worked with the client, and they were more than happy to adapt their interview process so that the support worker could be there along with the candidate. We actually, this is an interesting one, this individual wouldn't have been able to do a telephone or video interview because it would have exacerbated their circumstances. So actually we had to go face to face and skip the telephone interview, and that particular client normally did. Long and the short of it is it's successfully placed, and they told us he was one of the best recruits they've ever had in their life.
Yeah.
So it's a very individual circumstance, though. I think we need to engage with the individuals at the time.
Yeah, I think I was speaking actually, funny enough, to a tech client in Malvern yesterday about autism and the effect it's had on. They've got quite a lot of people kind of on the spectrum because of how techy they are, and they tend to actually like to recruit people along those lines. And they have had quite a lot of worried people, I think, just because of the amount of change. And they even said using vernacular like the new normal is something that kind of has made them quite nervous. And so I think it's definitely something that needs to be approached with caution. And I think and seeing what affects them. So the candidate Ben was talking about really struggled with telephone or video, needed face-to-face. So can they be accommodated in the office if there can be fewer other people there? Just so that they can have that level of routine and normality that they might need.
Perfect, thank you. And I think this could be our last question now. So I think this would probably continue in a longer conversation / debate, but I think there's a considerable amount more to be done around the attraction process with consideration to cultural capabilities in a company. Are any of your clients simplifying their process with this in mind?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's simplifying the process. I think the ones that you've seen do it successfully have made sure that right at the outset of designing their recruitment process, and this actually goes to pre-lockdown actually, as well as obviously the consideration of doing it virtually, is that they've really thought about how and where in the recruitment process they're going to get that message across about culture and about what's important to them, what their values are. Really interesting one actually, good example. Software house that we work with who were recruiting for a senior software engineer, they actually made their second video, they did a first video interview very techie based, so it was pure tech questions. Can this person do what we need them to do? The subsequent video interview, having that person pass that, they specifically asked the person to research the company values page and the company's vision, because the entire discussion was about the company values and vision and how that candidate felt about them, basically. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer there, because sometimes you might just not share those values, but to work there you need to. So that was a good example about where they put the structure in place and tried to address it. But it's not a simple answer, because the fact is that every company's values and visions are different. So the way that every company is going to want to try and get that across is going to be different too.
And I'd add something to that actually. So when you talk about particularly attraction part of recruitment, something that we started doing actually, if you have a look on our social media and website, we've done with a few clients. So you'll see the Specsavers group on there, IGS Lens Online, Vision Labs, and TVH, which is another company in Kidderminster. We've done quite a lot on their employer brand and trying to show the culture to sell the opportunity before the candidate even applies to the job. So we've got videos on there with line managers, with people who progress within the company, videos of people doing the job, pictures of celebrations, all kinds of different information to try and really give people a window into the opportunity before they even think of applying. And I think that's, in terms of getting the culture across, to start it before they even enter the recruitment process.
Yes, that's a really good point. We've just announced our partnership with Mannion and Laura Hewett to do a bunch of recruitment for them and their investment. And one of the big things for them was actually, we're not really well known, we need to start that kind of process off of building our employer brand. So absolutely, it starts actually before the process, and then you need to make sure that you're getting it across in the process.
Perfect. Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. You've had a lovely comment which I'm going to read out. So thank you for your thoughts on disability. Always good to highlight. I've worked from home for 13 years and I'm now semi-feral. Never any sick days and good for the environment too, along with other benefits, but always depends on the individual. So thanks again.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
And I'd like to say thank you as well for taking the time to share that with us. I hope everyone found that useful. Like I said at the beginning, the recording will be available later on today. So please let me know if you'd like the link and I can send that to you. Just before we come to a close then, I'm going to share with you some webinars that I thought would be relevant. So on Thursday, the 16th of July, 10 till 11, we've got redundancies arising from COVID-19, and that's delivered by Sally Morris from MFD Solicitors. And then the following day, Friday the 17th of July, 12 till 1, we've got how you can support your employees' wellbeing, and that's delivered by Westfield Health. So if you'd like to book onto any of our other webinars, please let me know. They are all free of charge. And I can book you onto those. We've had some really nice comments, so thank you both again. Thanks all for joining. I hope you take care and have a lovely day. Bye.
Just say if anyone's got anything that they didn't want to raise kind of as the group and want to pick up with us offline, then obviously please feel free to pick up the phone or drop an email to either one of us and we'll happily chat.
Perfect. Thanks both.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Yes.